feelings, or people focus on the mind itself. But that's one way of meditating, is you choose something, right, and for a certain length of time, you focus on it, and if distractions arise, you notice them and bring your attention back to that object. Then there's a second way of meditating that we just did, which you might call contemplative meditation or analytical meditation, and that's a different way of meditating. It's still meditation, but in that one, you choose a point, right, and you contemplate it from various angles using, to some extent. Sometimes they involve a little bit of imagination, but also involve logic and involve And in Buddhism, also, there's an important point about that. Is that kind of analytical or contemplative meditation? First of all, there are guidelines for it, but what you do, there are guidelines where they'll go through a series of logical steps and thoughts, right? And what your job is then to analyze those in relation to your own experience, right? Or so you don't just say, oh, the Buddha said this, so it's true. Oh, the Buddha said this. That's not analytical, that's just repeating something, right? In this case, what you do is you analyze it. You think, okay, have I met people who don't want to be happy, who desperately want to suffer and don't care about their own welfare at all, and try to create suffering for themselves? And then you have to analyze that, right? Because you might say, oh, wait a second, how about somebody who's addicted? Maybe they are running towards suffering. Right? But then you have to analyze and think, okay, what's their motivation? Right? No, they don't think they're running towards suffering, right? They're looking for something that they believe will make them happy at that moment. And actually, we're all the same in that way. From a Buddhist point of view, we're all addicted. There's a famous quote from Shantideva where he says, in the exact words, but basically, it's almost these words, like he says, is although everyone desperately wants to be happy, they run towards suffering. And what he points out is that that's all of it. And from Shantideva's point of view, he's looking around at everybody and saying, that's what all of you all are doing. And I'm not saying you all like that, I mean, me too. But that's what he noticed. And yet what he was recognizing is everyone desperately wants that, right? And yet we have the wrong ideas of what will make us happy, and so we run towards the wrong things, and then we get suffering. So there is the fact that somebody does something that causes them suffering doesn't mean they want to suffer. Right? The fact that somebody does things that make them suffer means that we're ignorant to some extent. So anyway, so my point there, you get it, right, is that you have to analyze it based on your own experience, and you think about it. And if you disagree, so if you analyze this thing and you finally come to the conclusion, I totally disagree with that, well, that's fine, or that's your right. You see? But the idea here is you analyze it from different points of view, using logic, using your experience. And in Buddhism, logic is always based on experience. In other words, the teachings on Buddhist logic say you can't present a reason to somebody that's not related. If somebody's never realized or never had a certain experience, you can't use an experience they've never had as a basis for logical deduction. So you have to start with something, your own experience, and then use logic to go from there to analyze it. So that's how you do contemplative meditation, until you get a feeling, right? And some recognition at whatever level you can. But sometimes it actually is like what's the word to say? Well, I'm going to go too far astray in that. Anyway, you do it until you have like a reasoned conclusion, right? And then when you have that reasoned conclusion, then you kind of let your mind dwell in and mix with that. And that's actually how we transform our minds. Is you analyze something until you come to a conclusion, and then you let your mind kind of blend in and mix with that for a while, because you're habituating or getting your mind used to a different way of seeing things. And that's that's why in Tibetan meditation, the word for meditation, gom, means familiarization. Because you're trying to familiarize your mind with a different way of seeing things. So you analyze, you get an experience, let your mind mix with that for a while. And by doing that over and over again, that's how you transform your mind. So these teachings called mind training, that's basically what they are. Right? Is you do that over and over and over, and you train your mind to experience life in a different way than you did before. So I want to say another thing, introductory, because these teachings, the 7-point mind training that we're going to talk about, these commitments or ideas from, there are two main methods in Tibetan Buddhism for training your mind in great compassion or universal altruism, or there are different terms for that. The Sanskrit word that comes, actually it's not identical to universal altruism, it's the result of universal altruism, is bodhicitta, the awakening mind, which is the mind of a bodhisattva. But anyway, the point here is universal altruism, that there are two main ways to train your mind in that. So this particular, one of them relates to, you'll hear Tibetans, if you go to a teaching by a Tibetan teacher, say mother beings, mother sentient beings. And that comes from one of the methods, which is think of the kindness of the mother. That's not the one we're talking about today. The one we're talking about today is what we just did a little piece of. And I'll just review it briefly, the steps, and then we'll get to the actual, because if you don't understand the steps for cultivating compassion, then it'll be hard to understand these commitments. So I just want to briefly review that.
Do you have another one?
Oh, I passed them out, so I don't know if there's more copies around or people could share. But so the steps for this particular way of cultivating altruism, I'm just going to review the steps. The first step is the first what we just did, is equanimity, right? So you contemplate over and over and over this sense of everyone wanting to be happy, of everybody being equal in that way, until you come to some feeling about that. There are a few more steps though in this one that we didn't get. And that other one we did about I'm one and others are numberless. Is again just, that's a preliminary act. Those are the preliminary of this method. But then there are other steps. You contemplate these. I'm not going to go into detail, but these would be other steps you would analyze logically. Is you contemplate that only cherishing myself, in other words, self-centeredness or egotism or narcissism, is the cause of suffering. And you have to analyze that. Again, it's a logical analysis. Buddhism asserts this, right? Buddhism asserts if you cherish only yourself more than you cherish others, if you think only of yourself and you don't think much of others, if you worry about your self-image a whole lot and you don't care about the welfare of others much and empathize with others, that's the cause of your suffering. Now you have to analyze that. You can disagree with it, but that, again, this is a point for contemplation. Next one, again, I'm just going through them briefly, would be that love and compassion are the cause of happiness, causes of happiness. So again, you would analyze that. You would say, is that true or not? You know, in other words, when beings feel genuinely happy in their heart, is that because they've been selfish, or is that because they've been loved? You know, so you analyze that and you relate it to your own experience, your observation of others. And again, I'm not going to go through all there are sub-reasons within those that you would contemplate, but I'm just doing an outline. So you do the equanimity we did. You would think of the faults of egotism. You would think of the advantages of love and compassion. And then you would do this method is called equalizing and exchanging self for others. So the next one would be the equalizing we did kind. The exchange comes next. Whereas if you come to a conclusion, and you would only do this after having come to the conclusion that egotism is the cause of misery, love and compassion are the cause of happiness, then you make a choice. There's a recognition here that ordinary people cherish themselves first, right? And put others second or third or fourth or fifth, depends on the context. And in this contemplation, what you do is you make a decision, I'm going to reverse that. From now on, my main concern will be infinite others. You know, it's not that I'm going to not care about myself and take care of myself, of course I will, but my main concern is to be loving and compassionate, is to live a life completely dedicated to love and compassion. So that would be the switch, right? And then along with that, there's a meditation called taking and giving, which some of you may know, right? When you imagine breathing in the suffering of others, breathing out love and compassion. And you do that more and more and more. And the point here, the reason why I reviewed this, first of all, is so you understand the method. But the second is this, is Buddhism, I want to really emphasize this, Buddhism doesn't say, first of all, Buddhism doesn't say you should accept the doctrine because somebody said it, right? Because the Dalai Lama said it, or the Buddha said it, or... Whereas what Buddhism is saying is, this is what the Buddha meditated, right? And he came to this conclusion. This is my experience. Love causes happiness, egotism causes suffering. And so he taught that, right? And then he said, now you contemplate it. If you come to the same conclusion, practice it. If you don't practice it. Like the same, and the Dalai Lama says that now, right? And there is in other Buddhist teachers. So that's the first point, right? So the Buddha laid out this method from his own contemplation and experience, right? And he said, now you contemplate it. Right? So that's what you have to do. There's no shortcut to that. Sometimes sometimes it's a little bit tempting, and this relates to the commitments now, so we'll get into this. Sometimes it's tempting to think, oh, the Buddha said love is the cause of happiness and compassion. That seems really nice. I'm going to try to go out and be loving. Right? I'm going to do loving things. But then you have to go back and contemplate. Actually, the Buddha didn't say, listen to these words and then go out and do loving things. Right? The Buddha said, contemplate this and see if it's true in your experience. If it is, blend your mind with that understanding. Right? Turn your mind into love. Right? The Buddha, and that's what it's in these precepts, right? Saying, don't just go out and do loving things. First, actually be loving, right? Then you can do loving things. If you go out and do loving things without actually experiencing love in your heart, then that's not a loving thing. Right? That's some other thing that you're doing, right? It's some idea I have. Oh, this would be really loving. But I'm not actually feeling love. That's not loving then, right? Whereas that's not, like, compassion isn't, there's a difference, right? In other words, if I say, oh, I gave some money to somebody who was hungry, aren't I compassionate? Actually, there's not from a logical point of view, no, those don't necessarily connect, right? Whereas I didn't say how I was feeling when I gave that, right? If I gave that feeling arrogant, oh, I'm better than this person, that's not compassion, right? See what I'm getting at? Like, it's easy to want to focus on something other than our own mind and transforming our mind, but that's not what these teachings are about, that's all I'm saying, right? Again, if you want to go out and do that, not transform your mind, that's your business, it's okay, but that's not what the Buddha is advising. See what I'm saying? That's not the advice that comes from the Buddha. The advice that comes from the Buddha is transform your mind and then do what comes from that. And the problem is this, is if you do the other one, right? If you go and you say, well, I'm just going to go out and I'm going to be nice to people, and I'm not going to contemplate all that because I don't feel like sitting down and thinking about it or something, and then you don't find that your mind is getting happier, don't blame it on the teaching, right? Because that wasn't what the teaching advised, right? The teaching advised transform your mind and then you'll be happy. So you have to, like, be careful about that. Does that make sense? The distinction?